The music had slowed to something barely there, and that's when I noticed my director's hands shaking against my shoulder. The Christmas gala that year was being held at the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto, and the whole engineering division had turned out in their good coats, the kind you only wear twice a year, string lights wrapped around the ballroom pillars, and somewhere a string quartet was working through a slow arrangement of a song I didn't recognize. Champagne flutes clinked. Somebody's spouse laughed too loud near the bar. It was supposed to be the easy night, the one where nobody talked about deadlines or budget overruns, where the partner shook your hand and told you the firm appreciated you. But Patricia Donnelly wasn't laughing. I'd been at Donnelly Marsh Structural Engineering for 14 months by then, and in all that time I'd never seen her stand still in a room full of people. Patricia ran every meeting like she was disarming something. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She'd just go quiet, fold her hands on the table, and ask one question that made you realize you hadn't actually finished your homework. People called her the Glacier behind her back. Not unkindly exactly, more out of respect mixed with a healthy dose of fear. She'd built half the mid-rise skyline in the east end of the city before she turned 40, and she ran the firm like every drawing that left the office had her name stapled to her reputation. Which I suppose it did. I grew up in Sudbury, in a house my dad built 2 rooms onto over about a decade, working weekends because the mine didn't pay enough to hire it out. My mom did the books for 3 different small businesses just to keep us in winter boots. Neither of them went past high school, and when I told them I wanted to study structural engineering, my dad just nodded slowly and said, "Then you'd better be good at it, because nobody's going to hand you anything." That stuck with me. When I landed the job at Donnelly Marsh straight out of Waterloo, it felt like the kind of thing you call home about, and I did, standing in the stairwell of my apartment building because the reception was bad everywhere else. Working for Patricia, though, was a different kind of education. Every calculation I submitted came back with red pen circling something I'd missed. Every presentation I gave to a client, she sat in the back and said almost nothing. And then afterward in her office, she'd go through exactly where I'd been sloppy. Not cruel, just precise in a way that made you feel both seen and slightly gutted. Her emails were 2 lines long. Her praise, when it came rarely enough that you remembered it for weeks. By the fall of that year, after one project review that went sideways in front of a client because I'd misjudged a load calculation on a parking structure, I'd started to believe she simply didn't think I belonged there. I began drafting my resignation on a Tuesday night in my apartment in Leslieville, sitting at the little table by the window with a beer going flat beside the laptop, telling myself I'd rather leave with some dignity than wait to be let go quietly in a year-end review. I didn't send it. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. Really, I think I was just scared of how empty the city would feel without somewhere to be every morning. Attendance at the gala was mandatory, more or less, the kind of mandatory where nobody says it outright, but everyone shows up anyway. I wore the one suit I owned that still fit properly, navy, a little tight in the shoulders from a winter of not running enough, and I went mostly because I didn't want to be the guy who skipped it the same month his numbers had gone sideways. Patricia arrived almost 40 minutes late, and when she walked in, I watched the room do that thing it always did around her, conversations dipping half a register without anyone deciding to lower their voice. She was wearing a charcoal dress, simple, the kind of thing that doesn't need to try, and for a second she looked exactly like she always did, composed and unreachable. But something was off. Her jaw was tight. She kept glancing toward the doors like she was doing the math on how early she could leave without it being noticed. I almost didn't go over. Every instinct I had said, stay in your lane, talk to the junior associates, don't make this the night you finally get fired for being too familiar with the boss. But the band shifted into something slower, couples started drifting onto the floor, and Patricia ended up standing by herself near the windows, half turned away from the room like she was looking at the lake instead of the party. Nobody approached her. I don't think anyone ever had. I walked over before I'd fully decided to. I didn't have a line ready, I just held out my hand. She looked at it like she wasn't sure what it was for. Then she looked at my face, and for the first time in 14 months, I saw something close to surprise cross her expression. A beat passed. 2. Then she put her hand in mine, and we stepped onto the floor. People noticed. I felt it, the little ripple of attention, the way a few heads turned like they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. But it faded fast, because almost immediately I felt something I wasn't prepared for. Her hand was trembling, not a little. The kind of tremor you feel in your own chest before you even understand why. I didn't say anything. I just kept my hand steady under hers and let the music carry us in a slow circle near the windows. The lake was dark beyond the glass, a few fairy lights moving slowly across it. Patricia kept her eyes somewhere over my shoulder for a long moment, and I could feel, through her hand and through the careful stillness in the rest of her, just how much effort it was taking her to stand there at all. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were wet, though nothing fallen yet. It was the kind of look I'd never once seen on her, not in the boardroom, not after the worst client calls, not ever. Fear, genuine, unguarded fear. For a long stretch, neither of us spoke. The band kept playing, something slow and unbothered, like it had no idea what was happening 4 feet away from it. I could feel the tension running through her shoulder into her hand, like a cable pulled tighter than it was built for. And somewhere in that silence, I understood something I hadn't let myself consider before. The woman who ran half the firm's biggest projects, who never once seemed unsure of anything, was standing in front of me completely undone. Her eyes met mine again briefly, and something in her face shifted just barely, like a door easing open a crack. Not weakness exactly, more like the absence of all the armor I'd only ever seen her wear. Underneath it was something quieter and a lot more familiar than I expected. Loneliness. Not the kind you feel after a bad week, the kind that settles in over years of being the only person in the room nobody else is allowed to lean on. I kept us moving slowly. I didn't ask what was wrong. Some nights you don't need to ask. You just need to not let go of the hand you're holding. Eventually, she took a breath, the kind people take before they say something they've been avoiding saying out loud. Her voice, when it came, was quiet in a way I'd never heard from her. None of the clipped certainty she used in client meetings. She told me that earlier that afternoon, she'd gotten a call from the city's transportation division. A contract Donnelly Marsh had been counting on for 18 months, a transit corridor expansion that would have carried the firm through the next 3 fiscal years, had just been pulled and handed to a competitor out of Mississauga over a procurement technicality. Nobody had flagged in time. It wasn't a small account. It was close to half the firm's projected revenue for the coming year. The partners were already calling an emergency meeting for Monday morning. People would lose their jobs. She knew which people. She'd already started running the list in her head. She said somewhere around the second glass of wine she hadn't actually wanted. She wasn't angry when she told me. She just sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. Patricia had spent her whole career being the person who solved the problem before anyone else even noticed there was one. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she said she didn't know what came next. Something about hearing that knocked the wind out of whatever resentment I'd been carrying around for 2 months. My own situation, the bad review, the resignation letter sitting half-finished on my laptop, suddenly looked small next to what she was holding. Small, and a little embarrassing if I'm honest. I told her, right there on the floor, that I'd assumed for months she didn't rate me, that I'd been sure the parking structure mistake had confirmed it, that I'd started writing my resignation because I figured I'd save everyone the trouble of eventually cutting me loose. She actually stopped moving for a second. Looked at me like I'd said something in a language she had to translate first. Then she shook her head, slow, almost sad. She told me she'd pulled my file before that gala, actually, going back over my project notes from the past year, because she'd been deciding who to put on the transit bid team before everything fell apart that afternoon. She said she'd been hard on me specifically because she thought I had it in me to run a project of my own within 2 years. And she didn't believe in being gentle with people she thought could actually go somewhere. Her exact words, low enough that I had to lean in slightly to catch them. I don't waste red ink on people I've already given up on. I didn't know what to do with that for a second. It felt like a window opening in a room I'd convinced myself had no windows at all. Then she said the thing that actually stopped me. Her voice dropped further, almost a whisper under the music. She said that when she saw me crossing the floor toward her earlier, something in her chest had loosened for the first time all day. Relief, she called it. Because for months she'd been carrying the transit news alone in her head before she even told the partners. And in that moment, somebody had walked toward her instead of giving her the space everyone always gave her. The song ended. Neither of us stepped back right away. The room slowly filled back in around us. Conversation rising again, somebody's laugh cutting through near the bar. But Patricia stayed where she was a second longer than the moment called for. Then, quietly, she said something I still think about most weeks. She told me she'd seen my resignation draft, not the whole thing, just enough. I'd left it open on my second monitor in my office that afternoon, before heading out to get changed for the gala, and she'd walked past on her way to grab something from the print room and caught the header. That was the other reason she'd looked the way she did when she walked in that night. Not just the contract, also. The fact that someone she'd been quietly building towards something was about to walk out the door without telling her why. She looked right at me then, and for the first time since I'd met her, Patricia Donnelly looked almost afraid of the answer to a question she hadn't asked yet. She told me she knew she wasn't good at this part, the part where you tell someone they matter to the team out loud instead of through red pen and silence. She said she'd built her whole career believing results spoke for themselves. But firms didn't survive on calculations alone, she said. They survived because of who stayed when things got hard, and she didn't want to lose one of the few people on her team who still cared enough to be afraid of disappointing her. Her hand tightened slightly around mine, and then she said it plain, no qualifiers, please don't leave, not the firm, not the team, just don't leave. I've heard a lot of honest things said to me in my life, but nothing landed quite like that did. Standing under string lights in a hotel ballroom with my boss's hand shaking in mine, the whole room felt like it dropped away for a second. It didn't feel like a gala anymore. It felt like two tired people standing at the edge of something neither of us had planned on. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. Not because the job had gotten easier in the last 10 minutes, because it hadn't, but because some things are easier to carry with somebody else in the room. The months after that were some of the hardest the firm had seen. Losing the transit contract triggered a full restructuring, 2 rounds of difficult conversations with staff, and a stretch through January and February where half of us were in the office past 9 most nights trying to land 2 new bids to cover the gap. But something in Patricia changed too. She started bringing the senior associates into decisions earlier instead of disappearing into her office to solve things alone. She asked for opinions in meetings and actually waited for the answer instead of moving on. She even started showing up to the Friday coffee runs the juniors did, which nobody had ever seen her do before, and which became, weirdly, the most talked about development in the office that winter. 2 years on, Donnelly Marsh is doing better than it ever did before that contract fell through. We picked up a hospital expansion in Hamilton and a mixed-use development near the waterfront that's turned into the kind of project people put on their resumes. Patricia is still exacting, still the person whose feedback makes you check everything twice. But people talk about her differently now. They've seen what's underneath the precision. A person who learned, the hard way, that running a firm isn't about standing above the people in it. It's about being willing to stand next to them when the floor gets shaky, even if you're the one who built the floor in the first place.